Emily looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Dad, Ryan's parents think it would be better if you didn't come to the wedding." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. I was still holding the folder that contained every receipt I'd collected over the past 11 months. The florist's invoice, the catering contract, the photographer's final payment confirmation, $85,000 worth of promises, all carefully organized the way I'd always organized everything important in my life. I stared at my daughter, waiting for the smile that never came. She shifted uncomfortably and looked past me toward the kitchen window instead. "It's just complicated," she whispered, complicated. Funny how a single word can erase an entire lifetime. I had spent 37 years working construction. My hands had built schools, hospitals, apartment buildings, and more homes than I could count. They weren't soft hands. They carried scars from decades of hard work, the kind of scars that remind you every morning exactly what you've sacrificed for the people you love. Those same hands had held Emily the day she was born. Those same hands had carried her on my shoulders through county fairs because she wanted to see the fireworks. Those same hands had worked double shifts after my wife, Susan, was diagnosed with breast cancer. Those same hands had signed every check for the wedding my daughter now wanted me to disappear from. I slowly closed the folder. "I'm sorry," Emily said, but even she didn't sound convinced. "They're very traditional." Traditional, that was the second excuse in less than 30 seconds. I nodded once. "I see." She looked relieved that I wasn't yelling. The truth was, yelling had never solved anything in my life. Silence usually taught people far more. Susan used to say I had the patience of an old oak tree. "You're impossible to shake." She'd laugh whenever I stayed calm during stressful moments. I missed hearing her laugh. She'd been gone for almost 6 years. Cancer doesn't just take a person. It steals future holidays, future birthdays, future anniversaries. And somehow, it makes every family milestone feel incomplete. When Susan realized she probably wouldn't live long enough to see Emily get married, she made me promise something. Make sure our little girl has the wedding she always dreamed about. I promised. At the time, I believed promises were simple. Keep your word. Do the right thing. Love your family. I had no idea that one promise would eventually cost me almost everything I'd spent my life building. Emily wasn't spoiled growing up. At least, that's what I used to believe. Susan and I weren't wealthy. Comfortable, yes. Rich, never. Every vacation required planning. Every Christmas had a budget. Every family decision involved sacrifice. Emily never knew that Susan and I skipped anniversaries at expensive restaurants so we could afford piano lessons. She never knew I'd turned down a promotion because it required traveling 6 months out of every year. I wanted to be home, to coach softball, to help with homework, to sit in the audience at every school play, even the painfully boring ones. When Susan got sick, everything changed. Hospital bills arrived faster than paychecks. There were nights when I'd sit alone at the kitchen table after dinner. Susan fell asleep, staring at spreadsheets, wondering which expense could wait another month. Emily was in college then. I never told her how close we came to losing the house. Children shouldn't have to carry their parents' burdens. That was always my philosophy. Maybe that was my first mistake. After Susan passed away, the house became unbearably quiet. For months, I caught myself setting 2 coffee mugs on the counter every morning before remembering. Grief has strange habits. It teaches your heart one lesson while your hands continue believing another. Emily visited often during those first 2 years. She'd bring takeout. We'd sit on the back porch where Susan used to grow tomatoes, talking until sunset. Sometimes we'd cry, sometimes we'd laugh, sometimes we'd simply sit in silence. Those evenings convinced me we'd survive losing Susan together. Then Ryan entered the picture. At first, I liked him. He was polite, well-dressed, ambitious. He worked in commercial real estate and spoke confidently about investment portfolios, luxury developments, and networking opportunities. He shook my hand firmly the first time we met. "Sir," he said, "Emily tells me you're the hardest working man she's ever known." I appreciated that, or maybe I wanted to. Looking back now, I realize Ryan had a gift. He knew exactly what people wanted to hear. 6 months after they got engaged, not Emily visited me one Saturday afternoon, carrying a thick wedding planner. Her eyes sparkled the way they had when she was 10 years old, asking for her first bicycle. Dad, that single word already told me she wanted something. I smiled. "What is it?" She hesitated. "We've started getting estimates." I laughed. "I'm guessing they're higher than expected." She sighed dramatically. "Much higher." We spent the next 2 hours looking through venue brochures, historic hotels, Dundry clubs, waterfront resorts, gardens overlooking vineyards. Every option seemed more expensive than the last. Finally, she quietly closed the binder. "I know it's impossible." "What is?" "My dream wedding." I looked at her for a long moment. She looked so much like Susan that it almost hurt. Same smile, same eyes, same habit of twisting a ring whenever she was nervous. That night, after Emily left, I walked into the garage. In the corner sat a small wooden paddle Susan had painted years earlier, Lake Carter. It was all that remained of the little lakeside cabin we'd built together during our first 10 years of marriage. The cabin wasn't luxurious, just 2 bedrooms, a weathered dock, an old fishing boat, and countless memories. It was where Emily learned to swim, where Susan taught her how to make blueberry pancakes every summer, where we scattered a handful of Susan's ashes after she passed. I hadn't visited much since then. The place carried too many memories, but it also carried value. Real estate prices had climbed enormously over the years. The following Monday, I called a realtor. The realtor warned me not to rush. "Mr. Carter, lakefront properties are selling fast. If you wait until spring, you could probably get another 20 or 30,000. I looked past him through the cabin window. The dock creaked gently against the water. For a moment, I could almost hear Susan laughing as Emily splashed around in an oversized life jacket, refusing to come out of the lake until sunset. Money had never been the reason we built this place. It was where our family felt whole, but promises have a way of changing what something is worth. "I don't want to wait," I said quietly. "I'd like to list it today." 3 weeks later, the cabin was gone. I stood in the empty living room after signing the final papers, running my hand along the pine wall one last time. Near the fireplace, faint pencil marks still measured Emily's height from the time she was 6 until she left for college. I almost asked the new owners if I could stay 5 more minutes. Instead, I picked up the old wooden paddle that read Lake Carter and carried it to my truck. It was the only thing I took. When I handed Emily the cashier's check, her eyes filled with tears. "Dad," she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I can't believe you'd do this." I smiled. "It isn't just from me." She looked confused. "It's from your mother too." She started crying. For a moment, I truly believed Susan would have been proud of us. "I promise," Emily whispered. "I'm going to make this a day you'd both be proud of." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The wedding planning became almost a full-time job. Every week there was another decision: flowers, music, lighting, guest lists, cake tastings, table settings, photography packages. Because I'd owned a construction company for most of my life, organizing projects came naturally. I built spreadsheets, tracked payment deadlines, compared vendor contracts, negotiated discounts. Every invoice came directly to me because I insisted on paying each business myself instead of transferring money through Emily. "It'll keep everything organized," I explained. She laughed. "I swear, Dad, you could organize a military operation." Probably. Neither of us thought twice about it. Whenever a payment Christmas, I signed the contract, wrote the check, and filed a copy in the blue leather folder that rarely left my truck. By the end of the summer, that folder contained contracts for the venue, the caterer, the florist, the photographer, the string quartet, the transportation company, even the custom lighting designer. I wasn't trying to control the wedding. I was simply trying to make sure nothing went wrong. At first, Ryan thanked me constantly. "You've taken so much pressure off us. I don't know how we'll ever repay you. You've been incredibly generous." He always knew the right words. But after his parents became more involved, something changed. The invitations became their project. The rehearsal dinner became their event. The guest list suddenly had names I'd never heard before. Business partners, Dundray Club friends, investors, executives. One afternoon I noticed my old friends from the construction company had quietly disappeared from the seating chart. Emily. She looked uncomfortable. "We had to make room." For who? Ryan's parents know a lot of important people. Important, it was the first time that word stung. A month before the wedding, Emily stopped calling every evening, then every week. Instead of dropping by the house, she'd text "Buzzy today," wedding stuff, talk later, sometimes later never came. When I did see her, she seemed distracted, always checking her phone, always apologizing, always in a hurry. I kept telling myself it was normal. Planning a wedding is stressful. Young couples get overwhelmed. Don't take it personally. That's what I repeated every night. Don't take it personally. One Saturday, I arrived at the venue to meet the event coordinator about final logistics. The ballroom looked beautiful. Fresh flowers lined the entrance. Workers adjusted crystal chandeliers while musicians tested microphones on the stage. I stood quietly near the back, imagining Susan walking through those doors. For just a second, I could almost picture her smiling beside me. Then I heard a familiar voice. Ryan's mother. She hadn't noticed me. Neither had the women standing beside her. "I just hope Emily follows through," one woman asked. "With what?" Mrs. Brooks lowered her voice. "Keeping the wedding elegant." "What do you mean?" She sighed. "You've met her father." A few polite laughs followed. He's nice enough, she continued. But he doesn't exactly fit the atmosphere we're trying to create. My chest tightened. Another woman chuckled. The poor man still looks like he came straight from a construction site. I know, Mrs. Brooks replied. Ryan and I have already discussed it. Ryan, not Ryan's parents, Ryan. He agrees some people belong in family photos and some don't. I stood frozen behind a stone column. None of them knew I was there. I could have walked over. I could have confronted them. Instead, I quietly turned around and walked back to my truck. The blue leather folder sat on the passenger seat. I rested my hand on it for a long time. Then I drove home. I told myself there had to be some misunderstanding. Emily would never agree to something like that. She couldn't. She was still the little girl who once cried because another child had been left out of a birthday party, wasn't she? 3 days later, she called and asked if we could meet for coffee. I had no idea. That conversation would change everything. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. It was the same place Emily and I used to meet after visiting Susan at the hospital. Back then, we'd order 2 hot chocolates because neither of us could admit how scared we were. Now I sat alone with a cup of black coffee that had already gone cold. When Emily walked in, I knew something was wrong. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile people wear when they've rehearsed difficult conversations in the mirror. She hugged me quickly before sitting down. I'm sorry, I'm late. You aren't. She glanced at the menu even though she clearly wasn't hungry. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, she took a deep breath. Dad. There it was again. That single word, always followed by something that changed my life. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. She folded and unfolded the paper napkin between her fingers. It's about the wedding. I waited. She swallowed hard. Ryan's parents are worried. Worried about what? She hesitated long enough that I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. They think there might be some awkward moments. I frowned. I'm not sure I understand. They've invited a lot of important people. I looked at her carefully. So? She stared down at the table. They think. She couldn't finish. I finished it for her. They think I don't belong. Tears filled her eyes. They're just afraid people might judge. I laughed, not because anything was funny, because sometimes disappointment arrives so suddenly, your heart doesn't know what else to do. They're afraid people will judge me. They don't know you. I wasn't asking about them. Silence. Then she whispered the sentence I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. They think it would be better if you skipped the ceremony. Everything around us seemed to disappear. The conversations, the music, the smell of fresh coffee. Even time itself felt strangely distant. I simply looked at my daughter, the little girl I'd once carried through thunderstorms because she was afraid of lightning. The teenager who cried in my arms after her first heartbreak. The woman I'd trusted with every piece of my heart. She couldn't meet my eyes. It's only one day, she said quietly. You'll understand eventually. One day. She thought it was only one day. She didn't realize she'd just rewritten not a third 4 years. I could have reminded her about the cabin, not even a Merry Christmas, about selling the last place where her mother still felt close. I could have reminded her that every flower she'd chosen had been bought with memories. I could have listed every sacrifice, every overtime shift, every missed vacation, every promise. But love isn't a receipt. You don't total it up when someone hurts you. You simply realize they've forgotten what it cost. I reached for my wallet. She looked confused. Dad, I'll get the coffee. You don't have to. I know. I paid the bill, walked her to the parking lot, and hugged her. She seemed surprised. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I kissed her forehead like I had when she was a child. I hope one day you truly understand what you're apologizing for. Then I got into my truck and drove away. I never looked in the mirror because I already knew she'd still be standing there, wondering why I hadn't argued. That evening, I took the blue leather folder from the passenger seat and placed it on my dining room table. The house was silent. It had been silent ever since Susan died. But that night, the silence felt different. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was clarity. I opened the folder slowly. Venue agreement, signed by Michael Carter. Catering contract, authorized by Michael Carter. Photography, entertainment, transportation, lighting, florist. Every page carried the same signature, mine, not because I demanded control, because every vendor had insisted the paying client sign the agreements. At the time, it had seemed like paperwork, nothing more. Now, it represented something entirely different: responsibility, authority, and a decision only I could make. I closed the folder again. Then I walked into the hallway. On the wall hung a photograph taken 28 years earlier. Susan stood beside the lake cabin, holding 6-year-old Emily between us. 3 people smiling as though nothing bad could ever happen. I touched the edge of the frame. "What would you do?" I whispered. Of course, there was no answer, only memories. But I knew Susan well enough to imagine one. She wouldn't have wanted revenge. She also wouldn't have wanted me to surrender my dignity. There is a difference. It took me years to understand that. The following morning, I put on the same navy blazer I'd worn to Susan's funeral, not because I was grieving another death, because another chapter of my life was ending. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the office of my attorney, Daniel Foster. Daniel had handled our family's legal matters for almost 20 years. He looked up from his desk and smiled. "Michael." Then he noticed the folder in my hands. His smile faded. "What happened?" I sat down without speaking. One by one, I placed the contracts across his desk. Finally, I handed him Emily's wedding invitation, the one with my own name missing from the family section, Chog. He looked from the invitation to me, then back again. He didn't rush me after all these years. He knew silence usually came before the truth. I took a slow breath. My daughter has asked me not to attend the wedding I paid for. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment. "I'm sorry, so am I." He opened the venue contract, read it carefully, then another, then another. After nearly 15 minutes, he leaned back in his chair. "Legally," he paused, "these agreements belong to you. You're the contracting client on every major vendor." I nodded. I thought so. He studied me carefully. "What do you want to do?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked out the window. People hurried along the sidewalk carrying coffee cups, briefcases, grocery bags, completely unaware that one quiet decision could change several lives before lunchtime. Finally, I turned back to him. "I don't want to punish my daughter." Daniel remained silent. "I just refuse to pay for a wedding I'm not welcome to attend." He nodded once. Then he slid the venue contract toward himself. Are you certain? I thought about Susan, about the cabin, about Emily's words. It's only one day. No, I said softly. It's 34 years. Daniel reached for the phone and dialed the venue. Daniel pressed the speaker button. Before the call connected, a cheerful receptionist answered on the second ring. Good morning, Grand Willow Estate. This is Melissa. How may I help you? Daniel looked at me one last time. I gave him a small nod. Good morning, he said calmly. This is attorney Daniel Foster. I'm calling on behalf of my client, Michael Carter, regarding the Harrison Ballroom reservation scheduled for Saturday, October 18th. One moment, please. Soft piano music filled the office. I stared at the contracts lying across Daniel's desk. Every page represented a promise I'd intended to keep. Not because Emily had earned it, because I loved her. 30 seconds later, another voice came on the line. This is Karen, the venue manager. Daniel introduced himself again. I'm calling because my client wishes to terminate the venue agreement according to the cancellation provisions outlined in Section 9. There was a brief pause. I'm sorry, Karen replied. Has there been an emergency? Daniel glanced toward me. My client has been informed he is not welcome to attend the event he financed. Silence. Not the awkward kind, the kind that follows when someone suddenly understands there is far more to a story than they first imagined. Karen spoke gently. Mr. Carter, are you available? I leaned toward the phone. I'm here. Her voice softened. I don't normally ask personal questions, but are you absolutely certain? I closed my eyes for a moment. No parent dreams of making this phone call. Another pause. I understand. She cleared her throat. According to the agreement, you're the contracting client. The cancellation is legally valid. She sounded genuinely saddened. I'm very sorry, so am I. By the time the call ended, the ballroom, the catering, the floral installation, the lighting package, and every premium service connected to the venue had been formally cancelled, not out of anger, out of principle. Daniel quietly gathered the papers into a neat stack. You know this won't be the end of it. I know. They'll call. I know. They'll probably be furious. I looked at the framed photograph of Daniel's own grandchildren sitting on the bookshelf behind him. They're allowed to be. I hadn't even reached my truck when my phone rang. Emily. I let it ring. A minute later, again, then again. By the time I reached home, there were 9 missed calls, 3 voicemails, and more text messages than I'd received in the previous 6 months. Dad, please answer. The venue says you cancelled everything. There has to be some mistake. Please call me. An hour later, Ryan called. I ignored that one too. Then came his mother, then his father, then numbers I didn't recognize. I placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter. For years, everyone had expected me to solve every problem. This one, they would have to sit with. That evening, the doorbell rang, hard, not once, 3 sharp rings. When I opened the door, Emily pushed past me before I could say a word. Her face was streaked with tears. Ryan followed close behind, his jaw clenched. What have you done? Emily cried. I closed the front door quietly. What I believed was necessary. You cancelled my wedding. I cancelled a wedding I wasn't welcome to attend. They said it can't happen now. I nodded. I know. Ryan stepped forward. You've embarrassed both our families. I looked at him calmly. No, I said. You embarrassed yourselves. His face turned red. You can't do this because your feelings got hurt. I almost smiled. My feelings? I walked to the dining room table and placed the blue leather folder in front of them. Open it. Emily hesitated. Ryan didn't. He flipped through the contracts impatiently, then stopped. Every signature, every authorization, every payment, every agreement, all in the same name, mine. His confidence began to disappear page by page. Emily whispered, I didn't know. No, you never asked. Ryan looked up. We'll reimburse you. I shook my head. It isn't about the money. We can transfer every dollar. It still wouldn't buy back what you asked me to give up. Emily started crying again. I didn't think. I know. Those 3 words hit harder than any argument ever could. She covered her face with both hands. I just wanted everyone to get along. I nodded slowly, and the easiest person to sacrifice was the one who loved you the most. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched across the room. Finally, I picked up the framed photograph from the bookshelf. It showed Susan standing beside the lake cabin, smiling into the camera with wind blowing through her hair. You know what I sold to pay for your wedding? Emily looked at the picture. The cabin. It wasn't just property. I swallowed. It was the last place where your mother ever felt alive. Emily's knees seemed to weaken. You sold it? I never told you. She stared at me in complete disbelief. I thought you used savings. I used memories. The room became so quiet I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticking. Tick-kick, tick, tick-kick. Ryan slowly stepped backward. For the first time since I'd met him, he had nothing to say. Emily collapsed into one of the dining room chairs. I never wanted this. I sat across from her. I believe you. She looked up, surprised. I also believe that every small compromise led you here. You chose their approval. She cried harder. I kept telling myself it was only one decision. I nodded. That's how people lose themselves. One decision at a time. She reached across the table. Dad, please fix this. I looked at her hand, then into her eyes. For 34 years, if she'd asked me for anything, the answer had always been yes. This time, I gently pulled my hand back. I can't. She stared at me. Why? Because if I rescue you from this, I paused. You'll never understand what it cost. And for the first time in my life, I watched my daughter realize that some consequences cannot be undone with an apology. Emily and Ryan left my house just before sunset. Neither of them slammed the door. Neither of them shouted. They simply walked out carrying a silence that hadn't been there when they'd arrived. I stood at the living room window until their car disappeared around the corner. Only then did I allow myself to sit down. For the first time all day, the weight of everything settled over me. I hadn't cancelled a wedding. I'd buried a version of my life I had believed would last forever. I looked at Susan's photograph on the mantel. I hope I did the right thing. The house remained quiet, but somehow I didn't feel alone. The wedding didn't happen, at least not that weekend. Within 24 hours, the cancellations spread like falling dominoes. The florist couldn't guarantee replacement day on such short notice. The photographer had already accepted another booking. The string quartet was unavailable for the following months. Not even a Merry Christmas. Even the luxury transportation company had filled its remaining weekends. Ryan's parents were furious, not because they cared about me, because they cared about appearances. People began asking questions. Why was the wedding postponed? Why had the venue suddenly become unavailable? Why were vendors refusing to discuss the situation? No one outside the immediate families knew the full truth, and I never told them. I refused every opportunity to defend myself in public. Dignity doesn't need an audience. About 3 weeks later, Daniel called. Thought you should know something. What is it? Ryan's family has been threatening legal action. I almost laughed. Against whom? You, for cancelling contracts that legally belonged to me. They've already spoken with 2 law firms. And Daniel smiled. Neither one would take the case. I leaned back in my chair. I figured as much. They're disappointed. I'm sure they are. Before hanging up, Daniel said something that stayed with me. You know, Michael, people often confuse generosity with weakness. I looked out the window toward the empty backyard. Maybe I did too. Winter arrived earlier than usual that year. The tomato garden Susan loved had long since gone dormant. One Saturday morning, I found myself driving without any particular destination. 2 hours later, I realized where I was. The lake, the road curved exactly the way I remembered. The old bait shop was still there. The diner, where Susan always ordered blueberry pie, was still open. Even the little church overlooking the water looked unchanged. I parked near the shoreline and walked slowly to the dock beside what used to be our cabin. The new owners were outside stacking firewood. When they recognized me, they waved. You built this place, didn't you? I did. It's beautiful. I smiled. Thank you. The husband disappeared into the house and returned carrying something wrapped in an old towel. We found this while renovating. He handed it to me. It was Susan's old tackle box. I'd forgotten it had been stored beneath the dock. You can keep it, he said. I think it belongs with you. I thanked him. As I walked back to my truck, I realized something. Memories don't live inside buildings. They live inside us. Selling the cabin hadn't erased Susan. Nothing ever could. Christmas came quietly. For the first time in years, Emily didn't come over. Neither did she call. I understood. Some wounds need distance before they can even begin to heal. I spent Christmas morning volunteering at the community center, serving breakfast to seniors who didn't have family nearby. One gentleman sat across from me, wearing an old navy cap. He smiled and said, "My daughter says she's too busy this year." I nodded. I understand. We spent 2 hours talking about fishing, baseball, and terrible hospital coffee. When I drove home that afternoon, I realized something unexpected. There were countless people carrying invisible heartbreak. Mine Ma wasn't unique. That thought didn't make it hurt less, but it made me kinder. Nearly 6 months passed before Emily knocked on my front door again. This time, she came alone. No expensive handbag, no designer coat, no carefully rehearsed speech, just jeans, a simple sweater, and tired eyes. When I opened the door, she immediately started crying. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I didn't answer. "I just wanted to tell you something." I stepped aside. She walked into the house slowly, looking around as though everything had become unfamiliar. Her eyes landed on Susan's photograph. "I've been thinking about Mum every day." "So have I." She nodded. I ended things with Ryan. I wasn't surprised. He kept saying we should blame you. She looked at me. But every time he did, she paused. I remembered what I asked you to give up. Tears rolled down her face. I became someone Mum would have been ashamed of. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, grief, because the little girl I'd raised had finally found her way back. But she had taken the hardest road possible to get there. She reached into her purse and placed an envelope on the kitchen table. What is it? I've been saving. I opened it. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount wasn't close to $85,000, not even half. I know it isn't enough, she said. It never will be. I gently pushed the envelope back toward her. I'm not taking this. But Dad, no, this isn't a debt. It never was. She looked confused. I didn't lose money, Emily. I lost trust. Money could be replaced. Trust had to be rebuilt, one choice at a time, just like it had been broken. Over the next year, she visited regularly, not every week, not because she felt guilty, because she genuinely wanted to be there. Sometimes we'd cook Susan's old recipes together. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch without saying much at all. Healing, I discovered, isn't dramatic. It's ordinary. It's showing up. It's keeping your promises. It's choosing someone even when no one is watching. One afternoon, Emily handed me a small, wrapped box. Inside was a wooden sign, hand-painted. The letters were simple, Lake Carter. I stared at it for a long time before looking at her. I found an artist who copied it from an old photograph. My eyes filled with tears. It's not the cabin, she whispered. I know, but I hope it reminds you that Mum and us were real. I stood and hugged her, not because everything had been fixed, because both of us had finally stopped pretending healing happens all at once. Today, that wooden sign hangs above the fireplace in my living room. People sometimes ask if I regret canceling the wedding. The truth surprises them. I regret that my daughter ever believed my dignity was negotiable. I regret that I had spent so many years teaching her to depend on my sacrifices, without also teaching her to respect them. But I don't regret the decision I made that morning in Daniel's office, because love without boundaries isn't love. It's permission. And sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give an adult child isn't another sacrifice. It's the chance to learn that respect, once lost, must be earned back. Not with words, but with choices. If Susan were here today, I think she'd still wish for the wedding our daughter dreamed about. But I'd like to believe she'd be even more grateful that, in the end, our daughter found something far more valuable than a perfect ceremony. She found her way home. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. What would you have done if your own child asked you to stay away from the wedding you paid for? Your perspective might help someone facing a similar heartbreak. And if you enjoy emotional family stories about dignity, forgiveness, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe for more.